The old man's hands trembled as he clutched the worn piece of paper. Frank Morrison, 72 years old, sat in the back row of the Tonight Show studio, a single folded sheet of music pressed against his chest like a lifeline. He'd been carrying those handwritten notes for 6 months, ever since the funeral, never finding the courage to share what was written there. It was a Tuesday night taping in November, and Studio 6B hummed with its usual energy. Jimmy Fallon was in peak form, having just finished a hilarious sketch about Thanksgiving dinner prep. The audience was warm, relaxed, ready for whatever came next in the evening's entertainment. But Frank wasn't thinking about comedy, he was thinking about Rose. Rose Morrison had been gone for 6 months now. 53 years of marriage ended by a stroke that came without warning on a quiet Sunday morning. Frank had found her in their garden, still wearing her favorite yellow cardigan, her hands dirty from planting the daffodil bulbs she'd never see bloom. The memories flooded back as Frank sat in the studio, Rose dancing in their kitchen to old Sinatra records while making Sunday pancakes, Rose reading mystery novels aloud during his recovery from heart surgery 3 years ago, doing different voices for each character until he laughed so hard his stitches hurt. Rose crying happy tears at their granddaughter's wedding last spring, whispering to Frank, "We did good, didn't we, Sunshine?" They'd called each other Sunshine for over 50 years, ever since that first USO dance when 18-year-old Rose had walked up to him and said, "You look like you could use some sunshine in your life, soldier boy." Frank had been shy, awkward, convinced no girl as beautiful as Rose would ever notice him. But she'd seen something in him that night, and she'd spent the next 5 decades making sure he saw it too. The house felt impossibly empty now. The silence was the hardest part. No more humming from the kitchen, no more of Rose's terrible jokes during the evening news, no more of her voice calling, "Good morning, sunshine," from the bedroom every day at 6:47 a.m. sharp. Frank's daughter, Susan, had bought the Tonight Show tickets months ago as a Christmas gift for her parents. "You and Mom always watch Jimmy together," she'd said. "Maybe a live taping would be fun." After Rose died, Susan had gently suggested that Frank still use his ticket. "Mom would want you to go," she'd whispered. She always said laughter was the best medicine. Susan had driven him to the studio tonight, worried about leaving him alone. "Dad, are you sure about this? You haven't been out much since." "Your mother bought a new dress for this," Frank had said quietly, "blue with little white flowers. She hung it in the closet and counted down the days. I can't let her down now." So here Frank sat, alone in a room full of strangers, holding the song he'd written for Rose in the sleepless weeks after her death. He'd been a music teacher for 40 years before retirement, had written dozens of songs for school concerts and community theater, but this one was different. This one came from the deepest place in his heart, where love and grief lived together now. The song had come to him one morning when he'd woken up and automatically whispered, "Good morning, sunshine," to Rose's side of the bed, only to remember she wasn't there. He'd sat at their old piano, the same upright Yamaha they'd bought when Susan was learning to play, and the melody had simply poured out of him. During a commercial break, Jimmy was doing his usual audience interaction, chatting with fans and taking selfies. His eyes scanned the crowd and landed on Frank, sitting perfectly still while everyone around him was animated and excited. "Sir, you okay back there?" Jimmy called out, his natural warmth immediately focusing on someone who seemed out of place. Frank looked up, startled to be noticed. The studio lights felt impossibly bright. He opened his mouth to say he was fine, to deflect attention, to blend back into the crowd. Instead, something broke open inside him. "I'm sorry," Frank said, his voice barely audible. "I shouldn't be here alone." The words hung in the air. The audience near Frank turned to look at him, sensing something profound in that simple statement. Jimmy set down his cue cards and stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "What's your name, sir?" "Frank Morrison." I was supposed to be here with my wife, Rose. She passed 6 months ago." A hush fell over the studio. This wasn't the playful banter audiences expected during commercial breaks. This was real grief, spoken aloud in a place designed for entertainment. Jimmy didn't hesitate. He walked down into the audience, making his way through the rows until he reached Frank's seat. The production team watched in confusion as their host abandoned all protocol. "Tell me about Rose," Jimmy said, simply sitting in the empty seat beside Frank. Frank's eyes filled with tears. "We were married 53 years. Met her at a USO dance in 1968. She had the most beautiful laugh, could light up any room. We watched your show every night together. She'd always say, "That Jimmy seems like such a nice boy. I bet his mother's proud." Frank paused, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief Rose had embroidered with little sunflowers. She was diagnosed with diabetes 10 years ago, but she never complained. Said every day above ground was a gift. Even when her vision started going, she'd still insist on reading me the newspaper every morning, squinting through those thick glasses, getting half the words wrong, but never giving up. The camera operators, without being directed, began filming this unscripted moment. Something told them this was more important than any planned segment. "She sounds wonderful," Jimmy said. "Are you here tonight because of her?" Frank nodded and held up the folded paper. "I wrote her a song after the funeral. I've been carrying it around for months, but I don't know what to do with it. She always loved when I played piano for her. Said I had magic in my fingers." "What kind of song is it?" "A love song about 53 years of good mornings and good night kisses, about how she made ordinary days feel like celebrations, about how love doesn't end just because someone's gone." Frank's voice grew stronger as he talked about the song. People kept telling me at the funeral that I'd move on, that time would heal everything, but they didn't understand. I don't want to move on from Rose. I want to carry her with me. This song, it's my way of keeping her alive. The studio had gone completely quiet. Even the Roots had stopped their casual pre-show practice. Everyone seemed to understand that something extraordinary was happening. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment forever. "Frank, would you like to share that song? I mean, really share it? There's a piano on this stage, and I think Rose might want the world to hear what you wrote for her." Frank's hands shook as he looked at the stage. "I haven't played for anyone since the funeral. I don't know if I can." "What would Rose say if she were here right now?" Jimmy asked gently. Frank managed a small smile through his tears. She'd say, "Frank Morrison, you stop being such a scaredy cat and get up there. That piano's not going to play itself." His voice took on a slight accent, imitating his wife's gentle southern drawl. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," Jimmy said. "But sometimes the most beautiful gifts we can give the people we've lost is to let their love live on through us. Maybe Rose sent you here tonight for a reason." Frank stared at the folded paper in his hands. Rose had always been the brave one in their marriage. She'd been the one to suggest they adopt Susan when the doctor said they couldn't have children. She'd been the one to encourage Frank to quit his safe bank job and follow his dream of teaching music. She'd been the one to hold his hand through every scary moment of their lives together. Slowly, he stood up. "She always said I was too shy about my music, said I should share it with the world instead of just with her." Together, Jimmy and Frank walked to the stage. The audience watched in reverent silence as Frank approached the piano bench. His fingers, weathered but still graceful, traced the keys. "This piano reminds me of ours at home," Frank said softly. "Rose used to dust it every Tuesday, even after we stopped playing regularly. Said music deserved to be treated with respect." He adjusted the bench height and placed the sheet music on the stand. "This is called Good Morning, Sunshine," Frank announced, his voice stronger now. "It's about waking up every day for 53 years next to the woman who made life worth living." Frank began to play. The melody was simple but achingly beautiful, the kind of music that comes straight from the heart without worrying about commercial appeal or technical perfection. His touch was gentle, each note carefully placed, the way a man handles something precious. When he began to sing, his voice was thin but clear, carrying every ounce of love and loss he'd been holding inside. "Good morning, sunshine in your yellow dress. Coffee in your laughter, Lord, how I was blessed. 53 years of ordinary days, made extraordinary in so many ways. Your garden blooms, though you're not here to see. The daffodils you planted still call to me. Every sunrise whispers your sweet name. Nothing in this world will ever be the same. And though you're gone now, I still hear your song. In every sunrise, your love carries on. Good morning, sunshine, wherever you may be. Thank you for a lifetime of loving me." Frank added a final verse that wasn't on the original paper, words that came to him in that moment. Associates. "Oh, I'll keep singing till we meet again. Your love's the chorus that will never end. Good morning, sunshine, this I know is true. Every day's a gift because I shared it with you." By the second verse, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Jimmy stood nearby, openly crying, not caring that cameras were capturing his emotion. The audience was silent except for the occasional sob from someone whose own grief had been touched by Frank's courage. When the song ended, the silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Frank sat at the piano bench, his hands folded in his lap, looking somehow lighter than when he'd entered the studio. Then, slowly, the audience rose to their feet. It wasn't celebratory applause, it was recognition of love that transcends death, of the courage it takes to share your heart when it's broken, of the beauty that can emerge from the deepest pain. Jimmy approached the piano and sat beside Frank on the bench. Frank, that was one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. Rose was lucky to have someone love her like that. I was the lucky one, Frank replied. She taught me that love isn't just about the big moments. It's about 53 years of good mornings. Jimmy reached into his jacket and pulled out his business card. Frank, I want you to have this. Not because I want anything from you, but because I want you to know that what you shared tonight mattered. It reminded all of us what real love looks like. But Jimmy wasn't finished. He stood and addressed the audience directly. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Morrison just gave us something more valuable than any celebrity interview or comedy bit. He showed us that love is the most powerful force in the universe and that sharing our grief can transform it into something beautiful. He turned back to Frank. You said Rose always watched the show with you. Well, I want you to know that from now on, you have a standing invitation to come back anytime, and I promise you she was watching tonight. Frank nodded, wiping his eyes. She would have loved this. She always said the best way to honor someone's memory is to keep their love alive by sharing it with others. The production team, moved by what they'd witnessed, made an unprecedented decision. They stopped taping the rest of the show and instead spent the remaining time letting audience members share their own stories of love and loss. What had started as entertainment became a community of healing. The episode that aired became one of the most watched and shared Tonight Show segments in the program's history, but more importantly, it sparked a conversation about love, loss, and the courage it takes to keep living after losing someone who defined your world. Frank began visiting local senior centers, sharing his music and encouraging other widows and widowers to talk about their spouses. He discovered that his grief, when shared, became lighter, and his love for Rose, when expressed, became a source of comfort for others walking the same difficult path. 6 months later, Frank returned to The Tonight Show for a planned segment. He'd written 12 more songs, all inspired by memories of Rose, but also by the new friendships he'd made and the healing he'd discovered through music and community. Rose was right about sharing my music, Frank told Jimmy during his return visit. Turns out the best way to keep love alive is to give it away. During that return visit, Frank revealed that he'd started a support group for grieving spouses at his church. We call ourselves the Sunshine Club, he said with a smile. Every week we share one good memory of our loved ones. Rose would say it's like keeping their light burning. The piano Frank played that night now has a small plaque that reads, "In memory of Rose Morrison, who taught us that love songs never really end." And every year on the anniversary of that first appearance, The Tonight Show dedicates a moment to couples celebrating long marriages, honoring the kind of love that Frank and Rose shared. Frank still wakes up every morning and whispers, "Good morning, sunshine," to Rose's picture on his nightstand. But now he also plays his guitar for an hour each day, writing new songs and sharing them with anyone who needs to remember that love, once given freely, echoes forever. Susan visits her father every Sunday now, and they've started a new tradition. After church, they sit at Rose's piano and Frank teaches her the songs he's written. Mom would want the music to continue, Susan says, and Frank always replies, "Your mother's music never stops, sweetheart. We just have to listen for it." Because sometimes the most powerful performances happen not when we're trying to entertain, but when we're brave enough to share the truth of our hearts with strangers who understand that we're all just walking each other home. And sometimes a love song written in grief becomes a beacon of hope for everyone who's ever loved someone enough to miss them forever.